Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to do our album review today, checking out a full album track by track, analyzing each track on its own and its contributions to the larger album. We're going to be looking at Maybeshewill's Sing the Word Hope in 4-part harmony. I'm going to be completely honest here. If the word hope is not sung in 4-part harmony somewhere in this album, I might be a little disappointed. I don't think that's a big ask. I really don't. It's right there in the title of the album. This is a Chekhov's gun moment. They're setting us up. If they don't deliver, I don't even know. So, let's kick this off with You Can't Shake Hands with a Clenched Fist. Ooh. So we got a 10-beat phrase. Interestingly, you would normally break this up into 5/4, but it feels like it's 4/4/2, which can still be done in 5/4, just not as visually appealing. Loving all of the drum accents here. Someone we switched to 7 too. I'm really loving that snare pattern. Coming in back full. Throwing some more harmony in there with our right guitar. Interesting. So, normally it'd be like, Bryan, that was less than 3 minutes long. As an instrumental, probably an intro track. You normally run those right into our second track. And here's the interesting thing with this band. This might as well be a full song. It has a very distinct stop point. And half their songs on this album are instrumental. I discovered that while getting all the lyric pages together to check out in the future. So, the track list, this is the shortest song on the track though. That's for certain, but it's really not that much shorter than tracks 5 and 6, which are sitting under 3.5. In fact, it's only 30 seconds shorter than that scared me. It's only 30 seconds shorter than track 6. So, yeah, like I said, as far as I see it, this is a complete song right here. At least respective to them. You know, if this was on a prog album where all the tracks were 10 minutes plus, yeah, this would feel a bit outside of that. So what is going on here, though? This is a mathy track, and I kind of want to look at this first. Our opening riff was a 10-beat pattern with groupings of 4/4/8. Or sorry, dang, can't count. 4/4/2. So basically we have a 4/4 section, which feels rather natural. We have an accent on beat 1 of the next set of 4/4, so that feels rather natural. We once again have 4 beats. We then have another accent on beat 1 again, and we expect another bar of 4 beats, but we have 1, 2, 1, and we accent the 1 again much earlier than we were expecting, given that up to this point we have heard bars of 4/4. We're expecting this to be another bar of 4/4, and it's not. It's cut in half. And so we have a little bit of this lurching forward. As I mentioned, it doesn't have to be this way. 5/4 does not necessarily need to be a lurching idea. If you combine 2 bars together, which we do get here, with 10 beats, 2 bars of 5 is 5 times 2, that's 10 as well. And if you play across the beat, like the drums actually do here, you get something that is even. It is symmetrical. You have 10 beats. You divide it right down the middle. It's the same on both sides. There's no lurching. There's no jumping. There's no tripping. And if you run the idea for all 10, then you also have an even idea there as well. And like I mentioned, the drums actually do this. If you listen to the drums, we don't get an accent on beat 1 of the second bar or beat 5 of the phrase here. We always get the accent on the even beats. We got a backbeat snare on this. And so that persists throughout. So if you listen to the drums, you'll notice that there isn't really a point where things kind of get switched up and odd up until beat 10 when we get a drum fill to bring us back to the beginning of the idea. That's the only time that things start to feel a little odd. And it's because, once again, we're expecting it to go to beat 12 before we restart the idea, before we go to a new bar. But otherwise, there's nothing in here that indicates that we should be listening to it any other way. And that's really clever, because that helps keep the 4/4 idea for the first 8 beats, and even technically for the first 9. It isn't until, well, beat 11, which is beat 1 of the phrase starting over, that we have this idea of lurching, of skipping time. We come off of this, though, and we move into a 7, which I didn't pick up when it happened. I picked up in the middle of it, because I didn't want to get too focused on metric stuff. I really wanted to dig into the emotional side of this, because, well, this is it's kind of post-rock. It's listed as post-rock and math rock, so that's interesting because I view them separately. Post-rock is really simple and emotionally fueled. To me, post-rock is about crafting the atmosphere and allowing your listener to dwell in it and sit in it for a while. Whereas math rock is very mental, intellectual, whatever the opposite of emotional would be. It focuses heavily on math and technicality and fast-moving ideas, and although maybe that's math core that I'm thinking of, but it kind of removes the emotional aspect and looks at more of a technical aspect. And so I think it's really interesting that this band finds a way to pair them together, and if this opening track is any indication of that, they do it by allowing each section to focus on different aspects. They're going to work with metric ideas, but within those metric foundations, we're going to explore atmospheres, and that's exactly what this track did. But like I said, we moved to a 7, which allowed for another lurching idea, but differently this time. If you get used to the 10, well, now we're 3 short, and if you never got used to it and it feels like we've gone back to the 4/4, well, we're also short there as well. We have removed beats regardless of how you were feeling the opening idea. In fact, if you were feeling the 4/4/2 that it was implying, now you're working with 4/3, and now you're getting that feeling of moving too early every other bar instead of every third bar. After this, we moved to a 12-beat phrase working with a triplet feel. However you wanted to feel it. It could be 4 bars of 3 or 3 bars of 4. Either one of them I felt throughout that section. And we continued on with this idea of 12 throughout the rest of the track and the final section as well. I think it's really interesting that the 12 doesn't really do anything that messes with the feeling of the song. It removes all those lurching ideas and lost time for two sections that feel like they naturally and smoothly move between repetitions. So the song can easily be divided in half, where our first two sections are about losing time and skipping bars and making the listener feel a little disoriented, and the last two sections are the opposite of that and finding something that is a bit easier to move along to groove with and to feel out. And so we go from disorientation to orientation, which is an interesting idea, especially since emotionally I think we pair along with that well. To say that atmosphere is a key aspect of this track is a massive understatement. It is the aspect of the song. Without it, we just have some rhythmic ideas that at least I was starting to grow weary on a little, especially on the latter half since it all stuck with that 12 beat phrase. And so the atmosphere, the feeling of the track is really going to be necessary to keep the attention going forward. And it's also setting up the whole album. You really need to hook people in here because I don't think much is going to be changing. This is what the album is. Um, and so the metric stuff is interesting, but not interesting enough to keep somebody around, I don't think. This is where the atmosphere comes in, and you really have to, or at least they really have to sell this. They need to get you invested emotionally from the get-go. And they might lure you in with some of the more technical metric stuff, but like I said, it's not a staying power. So what is the emotions of this track? I don't know. It's varied, and that intrigues me. It's doing a lot of things, and I don't know what any of them mean in particular, and it makes me want to dig into more. Intrigue is a great way to start any any work of art that is going to take up time. How many films or books start with cold opens? Maybe they start you in media res, in the middle of the story, and then they flash back to the beginning. You're like, how did they get there? How are they going to get out of it? Now you have questions, and now you're invested. Really simple way to do it. And so my intrigue here, my confusion, my lack of understanding is, I think, purposefully baked in, but with any luck, it'll be explained by the end and will pay off on subsequent listens when I come back to this first track and I'm like, oh, yep, that makes sense now. But as for right now, I'm a little lost on it. There is. It's interesting because there's tension, but there's also a type of relief, maybe even a happiness, a joy that we get in the third harmony in our final section. It adds a completely different flavor to that fourth section of the track. Like I said, I'm not quite sure how to read into any of this, but that's what I'm getting right now is a mixing of negative emotions and a mixed with positive ones. And I'm curious if they're going to expand on either of these throughout the album or if this is just a one-off and they never revisit these. Now, being post-rock, something really important is the wall of sound, the production of it all. This is going to be the last thing we touch on before we head into... Oh no, we got to talk about the drums. Man, they're so good. Wall of sound though. So we start off the track, pretty big wall of sound. We go into our second section. I think it was our second section, maybe it was our third. And we kind of remove the width of it, so it kind of feels a bit anemic compared to where we started. And so when we come back in with the next section, we can fill the space out again, and it has that impact that we want. This is something I'm expecting to see throughout the whole album. It's what post-rock does best, is contrasting width and power and density to create sections that move between a solid wall of sound and less solid atmospheres, to ensure that every time they bring back that wall of sound, it has the impact that is necessary to tell the story and to sell the emotion of what they're trying to have the listener experience. And so right off the bat, we're given this wall of sound, no wall of sound, wall of sound, in order to show us pretty much the structure, the skeleton, I think, of how most of these tracks are going to go. Now, this moved along quite a bit faster than a lot of post-rock has in my experience. I'm sure there's plenty of post-rock like this, and I've only been shown the longer, more drawn-out ones. That seems to be how the community works, is toss me into the deep end first, show me that I'm not going to drown. I'll come close to it, but I haven't yet. And then, that I can deal with the easier stuff later. I don't know, it feels backwards to me, but it's a fairly consistent process with y'all. So, it's that's been true with death metal. It's been true with black metal. You guys started me on Crowless. What in the world? There was so many places to start from there. You threw me into the deep end with growling, even with post-rock, prog metal. Yeah, it's just pretty consistent. And I don't blame y'all. You're just super passionate. And you've had the time to acclimate to the heavier stuff. And, maybe there was an understanding that I would acclimate faster because of my, theoretical knowledge and stuff like that. I don't know. I guess the process has kind of worked so far. But if there is more post-rock that moves quickly like this, like I said, I'm sure it's out there. I'm just wondering how long this is going to stick around. 4 sections in a 2.5 minute song is pretty quick, but we also have a couple of 6 minute tracks and an 8 minute track ahead of us as well. And are we going to move so quickly through those, or are they going to be what I expect of sitting in a section, slow burn style, for multiple minutes? Is our 8 minute song also going to be a 4 section track with 2 minutes per section rather than 30-ish seconds? I don't know, but that was something I definitely picked up on that it almost felt a bit rushed, in a sense that it could have been a collage or a montage of some of the themes we would experience in the rest of the track. The rest of the album. I have nothing to base that on. It's just a hypothesis at this point. But yeah. The last thing is the drums. They kept me going. I'll be honest. The drums are what were the most interesting to me. The atmosphere shifted enough for me to keep returning to it at a nice interval. And the rhythmic stuff was kind of interesting. But again, I think this is going to be a quicker song, a faster paced song as we switch between sections faster. And we might not see that in the next track or the following tracks. And I'll have more time to dwell in a section. And if I quickly, latch onto the emotion and the metric stuff, post-rock doesn't really give a lot to hold on to after that. It's really something that's, I'm not going to say it's resistant to this type of listening, but the post-rock we've listened to in the past is not the best for it. My exposure to the style is one that has it placed in my mind as a more emotive or casual listen, something to fully open yourself up to rather than trying to dig in and open it up and dissect what it's doing. And so I'm kind of worried about that. I'm I'm happy about the length though, 38 minutes. I'm either going to finish this one feeling that it was, that I'm glad it was on the shorter side, or I'm going to finish this one wanting more. I don't really see an in between there. 38 minutes is short for an album. And if I really enjoy what's going on, it's going to feel real short. But if I'm not, it's going to feel nice. But the drumming, like I said, there wasn't much to latch onto. Everybody was just kind of playing pretty rigid rhythmic patterns with chords, heavy distortion, all the texture stuff. But the drums, man, they were explosive. We typically had a cymbal giving us a nice beat, but the snare and bass work, the tom work, I mean, that was all over the place. It was so energetic. It provided a momentum through the song that I think was desperately needed, especially given the slower rigidity of everything else present. There was no vocals to latch onto. No, well, I say vocals, but melody at all, regardless of what instrument it came from. And so, like I said, this is really something that you really have to open yourself up to and fall into the atmosphere. And I think that's going to be true throughout most of this this album. I'd mentioned that a couple of these tracks have vocals to them, but I'm kind of hoping that there's some melodies throughout some of this. This opening track is not giving me a lot of confidence in that range, but the drums are kind of that role. I'm not going to say that they're melodic drumming, but they do engage in interesting ideas enough to catch my attention frequently. I'm like, oh, what's the drums doing now? Let me check out this atmosphere. Oh, the drums are doing something cool. I'll check that out later. Let me see what's going on with the drummer. It's pretty consistent. I love what the drums are doing. They are, like I mentioned, an explosive energy among something that's a bit more rigid and mundane, at least rhythmically and melodically speaking. Again, textures, atmosphere, chordally, these are things where post rock is going to shine. And I'll try to tune into that as often as I can. But the technical side of my brain, while technically listening, is probably going to want to engage with the metric and drumming stuff throughout most of this album. I'm really going to have to, like a little kid, drag it away and take it over to the less surface level interesting stuff. What would you call that? The drumming is like a shiny diamond. You can't not look at it, and everything else around it feels kind of dull from that perspective. But what seems dull on the surface actually has depth when you dig into it. It's just not as immediately interesting. There's a phrase for all this, and I don't know what it is. No lyrics on this one, so we're just gonna dive into our next track here. This one's called Co-Conspirators. I guess let's just go. Yeah, the cymbals are giving us a 5, but this is a really interesting phrase coming out of the guitars. Oh, it's almost like the 5 is split in half with 2.5 beats per side. Very powerful, very big.
so much of the time we're just lost.
I really love the variations in the drums.
Tell us what is right. Tell us what is true.
We start with that hi-hat rolls, and then we go to a snare roll.
The rich win, the poor are powerless.
Or maybe we don't.
We become tired of hearing people
Variety,
lie.
right? They didn't follow the pattern I thought they were.
And after a time we become dead. If we think of ourselves as victims. We become victims. We become weak. Doubt ourselves, we doubt our beliefs. And we doubt the law. But today you are the law.
Yeah, just a very full sound. Look at the visualizer over there, and you'll see it's just static. Really sitting up there at the top volume, just maxed out. Interesting, back to a 7. Alright, it did go to the next track, which I was not expecting at all. So yeah, that was pretty much what I had detailed out. We had a wall of sound to open with. We shifted down to a sparser both production and composition, and we built back up into a well, I didn't predict the build up, but I predicted moving back into a wall of sound idea. This is exactly what I'm expecting for the whole album here. The slow burn crescendo, though, that was a nice touch. I was kind of expecting 4 more bars on that, though. I felt like they were reaching their peak, and I really thought they were going to push past the peak to really sell the impact. Instead, they almost had a width jump where it was sort of linear, a linear rise, and then right about here, they just kind of jump up where there's like a gap where they were and then where they went to. And I thought maybe they would have pushed into it. They chose not to, though, which was interesting. Most of that track was in 5. We ended it on 7. The opening 5, though, was interesting in that, like I said, I think it was split right down the middle. 2.5 beats per phrase, which is just such an odd way to divvy up 5. Primarily because we don't really write time signatures in halves. So instead of 5/4, we probably write it as 10/8. And then do a grouping of 5 and a grouping of 5, and that would give us our 2.5 beats of 4. But yeah, I mean, how many times have I brought up 5/4 and I talk about dividing it up in a group of 3/2 or a group of 2 and 3, creating an asymmetric element to it. You can certainly find a symmetrical grouping to put into any odd time signature just by dividing a beat in half, which is what they did here. It's so irregular. Nobody really does that. And that makes this really interesting because it feels like the second half starts early. It starts on the and of 2 rather than 3 where we would expect it. Huh. Yeah, that's just the more I think about it, I'm replaying the phrase in my head, and yeah, it's on the end of 2. It's just so strange. Which, yeah, it's probably written because you can't do halves, like 2.5 over 5. No, 2.5 over 4. You can't write that. Nobody writes in half beats. I don't even know if you can. Like, literally in the rules of notation. I've never seen it. It's understandable. So yeah, probably just bump it up though. Instead of 5/4, do 10/8. Or even better, bars of 5/8. Then you don't even have to find the midpoint in the bar. You actually have a dividing line. Yeah, 5/8's a weird time signature though. For this exact reason. It's 5/4, but if you're following the downbeat of 1, it feels early every time. So yeah, then like I said, we had 5 throughout most of this, and then we finish it on 7, which was an interesting shift to do in our third section. We have the rising and falling. One thing I really want to point out that I enjoyed in this one was the inclusion of new instruments. We had a piano in here that I thought was really nice, really nicely done. See, there's already 2 guitars. One on the left side is pure chords. I'm pretty sure the structure was constant eighth notes. You just play the chord that the bar is. When the chord changes, you change what you're playing, but you keep that constant eighth notes. Then we have our right guitar. And I had to pause there because this is actually my left. If I made the camera work like a mirror, where I raise my right hand and it's on the right side on the screen, the text is backwards. So I've had, for like the past few months, I've noticed this, and I'm like, oh, I've got to figure this out. So I've been training myself to say right and left, and it feels so unnatural. It usually takes me a second if I think about it. So, anyways, little ramble there. Where were we? Oh yeah, the piano, and then we have our no, the left guitar was doing the chords. Our right guitar though has the rhythm, or the riff, or whatever you want to call it. It is the usually one bar idea that is just done over and over and over and doesn't change with the chord. The pitches don't. They're static. They're stuck in time, regardless of how the chord changes. That is how our first 2 tracks have been composed. Dual guitar, one is rhythm, one is a lead. It doesn't really leave a lot of room for complexity. You have a riff, you have a chord. All the complexity that comes out of it is note intervals. Since one is static and one is moving, the intervals themselves are going to change from chord to chord, and that's going to influence the emotion of the track. You're going to get some complexity out of that. So introducing the piano here to play a second melody line, I thought was really nice. I just wish it was a melody line and not another one bar phrase that acts as a entirely short repetitive counterpoint to our other guitar. Now, it's also just very post rock. I'm asking for melody from a genre that doesn't typically work with melody. I'm trying to squeeze water from a stone here. But just as usual, a little bit of a subjective element here in this album review is that I like post rock, I think, but one, I have to really be in the right mind for it, And two, I always feel exceptionally underwhelmed applying this type of attentive listening to it. And that underwhelming feeling tends to come out as wishing there was something else to grasp onto. So, I don't know. I always find it difficult to make videos for, I don't want to say simpler music, but definitely harmonically or melodically simpler music where there's less of the stuff that I normally latch onto and talk about. The slow burn was really nice, and I hope we see more of it, especially at this pace. I thought this was a great way to go about it. We had the vocal section. I mean, it's spoken word, but it also sounded like an older fellow. I don't know how old this band is. Oh, I mean, this is probably a new picture. I don't know if the band's changed. This is a 2009 album, and this picture may be as new as 2021. So I don't know if there's been lineup changes, but yeah, all these dudes are fairly young. They look to be about my age, maybe late 20s, mid to late 20s, early 30s. Uh, yeah, I can't imagine many of them sound like this older dude in this song. So are they using vocal samples then? Anyways, the spoken word section though, we bring it down to just a couple of ideas. We slowly add in a couple more, and then we do the crescendo. And the crescendo is just music term for get louder, but not immediately. Over time. Sort of like how an accelerando is to get faster over time. This is crescendo to get louder over time. And we have a really long crescendo that's like, I don't know, 20 bars long. It just gets louder and louder and louder and louder and louder. And it brings us to our final moment where we change the core riff. We keep the chord progression though. We keep the piano line, I think. I don't think the piano line changes. And it's just a really big moment. I'm still not 100% connecting with the emotions here. The song definitely made me sad, but not entirely. And I think this is where post rock shines really well is complexity of atmosphere. It's not just about a song that does the same thing over and over and is highly textural. Post rock really works best when that hypertextural sound means something interesting. It's not just sad, it's not just happy, it's not just angry, it's not just weighty. There's usually multiple facets to it. And that is going to be, at least in my mind, what makes the best post rock. And like I said, I'm still not 100% sure what's going on here. There are moments of uplift, but there's also moments that just really seem to be heart wrenching, and I don't know why. I can't really say, oh, they're using a minor key here, and that makes it feel sad. It's never quite apparent. It's like when you look at a work of experimental art, a painting or a sculpture that doesn't really mean anything in the real world. It's not like, a mother holding a child and you can immediately assign emotions to that based on where you mentally are. Maybe you just lost your mom and now that's sad. Um, or maybe you just reconnected with your mom and now it's a happy thing, right? Where you're bringing your own biases in. But you look at something that's completely abstract and it just makes you feel things. And that's kind of what this is. I can't pinpoint what aspect of it is really bringing in specific feelings, but it's it's a collage of emotions that the songs so far have made me feel, and I can't even name them. It's well, to borrow a term I've already said, it's complex. I'm gonna hit the lyrics. However, I'll show this when we get back to it, but there's a big banner on their Bandcamp page that says sale. And I was thinking, oh, maybe this is on sale. Maybe I'll pick this up by the end of it and really like it or something. Um, yeah, let me hit the lyrics and then we'll move on. So, this is interesting. It seems to be like it's attempting to be a bit of a motivational speech in a way, but it comes off not. It says, so much of the time we've just lost. We say, please, God, tell us what is right, tell us what is true, but there is no justice. The rich win, the poor are powerless. We become tired of hearing people lie, and after a time, we become dead. We think of ourselves as victims, and we become victims. We become weak, we doubt ourselves, we doubt our beliefs, and we doubt the law. But today, you are the law. And so I think it's a pretty clear surface level look at society. In fact, I don't know when this soundbite was originally used, what film or radio show or TV show it might have been used in, where the quote comes from is what I'm saying. But it sounds a bit older to me, and it is nonetheless still relevant. The rich win, the poor are powerless. We become tired of hearing people lie, and after a time, we become dead. Now, what I think is interesting is that it doesn't say that we die. It says we become dead. I wonder if that's a type of we become dead inside. We become numb to it all. The lying is just background noise. CEOs getting bailouts while people are hungry on the streets that was yesterday's news, and the day before that's news, and the month before that's news, and it'll be tomorrow's news too. And there's cause for outrage, but when it's the same news every day, how long can you be outraged? So we become a little dead. But I'm trying to understand where the twist here goes. We think of ourselves as victims, so we become victims. We begin to doubt ourselves, beliefs, and the law. But today, you are the law. I think it's also important that this wasn't said in a vacuum. And I think this is where context is going to help a lot. Who said this to whom? This could be exceptionally frightening, or it could be heartwarming, motivational, depending on who said this and who heard it. It makes me wonder if knowing the context of the quote helps understand its placement in the song. But I'd also go on a limb and say that understanding the emotions of the song probably help understanding the quote as well. They probably work together fairly well, and I'm missing information on both sides. As I've already mentioned, the emotions of the track, I feel them, but I can't name them. And I can't tell you what part of the music is alluding to these different sounds or these different feelings either. It's all just very ambiguous. That's the word I want. And it's sort of like a veil, too, isn't it? So the thing about a veil is that you can see it very clearly, but you can't see what it hides very clearly. So there is an immediately discernible element and a hidden one. And this music feels like that, in that I can latch onto the drum rhythms, or counterpoint, or metric ideas, time signature changes, phrasing ideas. I can latch onto all this very easily. It all makes sense to me. But the minute I try to see what's beneath it, what the song is trying to say through these ideas, through the chords and the production, all I get are vague concepts. What is honestly probably the least interesting part, which is the time signatures, are what I'm going to be able to talk about the most here. And when it gets to what I think is probably the core aspect of this album, which is the emotional feeling of it all, the weight of these soundscapes, and the possibly the four voice samples that we have in here, the sound bites, and the relationship to the songs, I'm not going to have much to say, I don't think, unless something begins to click for me. And that is both sad and exciting. I wish I could have the words to definitively tell you why this album is great, what it's doing, why it's doing it, how everything connects. But it's also exciting because it gives me something to dig into on a subsequent listen. I feel like I'm repeating myself. I must have said this recently, that last week before maybe, that I really enjoy sitting up here and helping y'all figure out why you love your music so much, why you love your favorite tunes, and giving you the vocabulary and the attention to detail, and giving you these ideas and saying, this is why this is pretty awesome. You're like, oh yeah, you've always kind of felt it, but you never had the words. But I sit in that same seat occasionally as well, more often than not, actually. Um, and I think this is one of those times when the roles are going to be reversed, and it's going to be really interesting to hear what y'all's perspective is. Yeah, because it's possessive, not plural. Yeah, but what your perspective is on this. And maybe I can learn about the music through y'all's eyes rather than just through y'all's ears. That makes more sense. But yeah, let's get back to it. This one's really interesting. I've been looking forward to digging into this track as well as the next one. It's called This Time Last Year. And later on, we're going to get to a track called This Year Last Time, I think. Oh, Last Time This Year. So let's dig into this one and see what's going on. We had started it, but I'm going to try to get as close to the beginning and start it over entirely. Whoops. Let's try that again. Ooh, Roy! Very grunge. Or even some nu metal. Yeah, look at that volume change over there. Got some tremolo picking in here, setting a scene. And see, this is bittersweet too. We started with anger, and then we kind of went towards sadness. But this is bittersweet. There's elements of hopefulness here, but not entirely.
Clothes, videos, toys, cheeseburgers, cars, a functioning economy.
You can still have a functioning economy and preserve open spaces with a little planning.
Yeah.
Socialism, complete disaster.
Theodore Roosevelt was a
Matthew
socialist.
Broderick and Dennis Leary?
Henry David Thoreau, Robinson Jeffers, National Geographic Society. These are all socialists.
You're talking
Oh no, is that David
No, no,
Spade
I'm
and Dennis
not
Leary?
covering every square inch of populated America with houses and strip malls until you can't even remember what happens when you stand in the meadow at dusk. What happens in the meadow at dusk? Everything. Everything. Everything.
Shifting from backbeat to the front. All right. Real quick, one idea I wanted to talk about for the last track, track number 2. I forgot to bring up until then. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. This rising idea. In our final section of the third track, we had this other instrument. It might have been another guitar. I don't know. The pitch was just constantly going up, going up. Y'all are gonna hate me for this because I see it in the comments all the time, asking for auditory aid, and I wish I had an easy way to do that. I'm exploring it, but I understand that my memory for music is probably a bit better than everyone else's. And I'm like, hey, do you remember this part from, now we're talking like 30 minutes ago. You're all like, no, I don't remember that part, Bryan. And we just listened to a different song entirely. There's no way I'm remembering it. But yeah, the ending to track 2, we had this rising guitar idea. I don't know if it was a guitar, it was a sharp instrument though, or a sharp timbre. It could have been a distorted violin too, just a little bit of edge. It just kept rising and rising and rising. Then we kind of hit a peak, and we danced around the peak a little bit. And then eventually, near the end of the song, I think with like 5 seconds to go, we push up past the peak we had and go like 4 pitches higher. And it was such a tense element to that section of the song, where we also had just a ton of music going on. It's a large moment to begin with, and then added in this tension at the end. It was something. It had a lot of impact on me, and like I said, I couldn't go on without bringing it back up. I wish I had remembered it, 6-7 minutes ago now. So this track was interesting. We start off with some grungy new metal kind of stuff going on. 4/4 even. Standard 4/4. I think it's the first time we actually hit a standard 4/4. Just really aggressive, very angry. We had a lot of tension in our lead guitar, usually starting off with a couple of notes that were consonant and then holding on to that last note they played and dancing around it, changing up the intervals of notes against it and introducing various levels of tension and dissonance to the song. Drums are heavy and impactful. Um, and then out of the blue, it just kind of evaporates, and we're left with this bittersweet moment of just really chill, laid back, semi sorrowful guitar work. Interestingly, the drums were missing here entirely. We had percussion, but I don't even know what to call it. In fact, in my mind, it was digital. It almost sounded like a gear, almost. A really clacky gear, like some sort of children's toy that has like a little. Oh, you know what? That's kind of what it is. You guys remember the pullback cars? Where you would like pull them back and it would like, I don't know, do a. I actually don't know how they work. In my mind, it like stretches a rubber band and then releases it. But I honestly have no idea. But anyways, after you pulled it back so far, it would start clicking, click, 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 click. Now I'll let you know that you're maxed out. Um, that clicking sound is kind of what this reminded me of, just a lot faster and in rhythmic variety. But yeah, it comes off as like a digital percussion sound. Really interesting choice because, as I just mentioned, it's not really percussion, it's sort of a noise, and in a lot of ways, I'd even call it noisy. If that sound were isolated and not surrounded by the music in this track, I would probably find it annoying and ask whoever's making it to stop making it, please. It only becomes musical in the context of the music, which is something that's always fascinated me about sound in general. Some music we perceive as musical by default usually comes from instruments. You know, you listen to a lone saxophone and you're like, oh, that's musical. Even if it's a bit odd, maybe they're honking on it rather than playing it traditionally, but you still accept that it's musical, part of the cultural bias of the instrument, or the cultural bias we have based on the fact it is an instrument. There's some sounds that only make musical sense to us in music when it's surrounded by other things we know are musical. And this is one of them. It does provide a lot of variety, though. It keeps the intensity up, which I thought was interesting. The drums at the beginning were rather aggressive, and there were a lot of attacks. It was not chill, laid back. There's just a lot of attacks to it. And the same is true with this gear percussion as well. It keeps that same rhythmic momentum up if we look at how many times it is utilized per bar. It lines up with what the drums are doing, but it's a much lighter sound. It's not a drumstick smashing into a drum head. It is just a little clicking sound. So I think that's really interesting. I wonder if they're going to continue exploring sound like that. It's not the first time that we've introduced a new instrument either. Last track we had the piano and possibly, like I said, an electric violin or something. There's something at the end of track 2 I just got done talking about. Is this going to be something they do though? In this section though, this B section, we bring it down, we introduce this new percussion, we wipe out the drums. Both guitars have new lines, and the spoken word, I don't think the spoken word comes in quite yet. But we reach a part where I was like, and uplifting, if you remember that. There was a new guitar melody that came in that was very positive, and it completely shifted the perspective, the color of the entire song at that point. I don't think the chords changed, but their relationship to the new melody crafted a new emotion. And it's sort of like painting, where you can, on your palette, right? You have your colors, and all you have to do is, take some of the purple, take some of the pink, take some of the orange, and then add a little drop of white. And it doesn't take a lot, but when you do that, it drastically alters the hue that you're going to get out of this. And that's what this feels like. It was such a small addition, just a new melody line with a brighter outlook to it, and it completely alters the emotional aspect there. It's still bittersweet, but leaning more towards the sweet. In fact, heavily more towards the sweet. And it even loses a bit of the sorrowful side entirely at moments. And all it took was one little line out of a guitar. I find it interesting then. The voice sample was something about building up and removing trees and building malls and stuff. You know, paving paradise and putting up a parking lot. To reference another track, another song. And so we have this bittersweet moment here at the end with a bit of triumphantness, a bit of uplifting element, and it's almost like the song starts in anger, moves to a type of sadness that lends its way into a victorious state that leads right back to the anger and angst of the beginning. And once again, I just don't it the song makes me feel things, but I don't know what it means entirely. I think that's the last time I'm going to say that. I'm going to try not to say it again. I think it's going to be a recurring theme throughout. But this is definitely a song that goes in that same category as, interestingly, a lot of prog rock, where I think a second listen is exceptionally required. But the depth here isn't technical depth, it's emotional depth, soundscape depth, stuff that you'll pick up on after you know what's coming up. And you can stop looking at the surface level details and entirely dive into the depths of the music and explore what is down there. Alright, so quite a bit of time has gone by in my time. Why did that happen? And I actually started to look some stuff up because I got a bit curious. Could you go away, please? Thank you. So the quote from Co-Conspirators about things not changing and people becoming tired and thinking themselves as victims comes from a 1982 film called The Verdict. It's about an outcast alcoholic Boston lawyer sees the chance to salvage his career and self-respect by taking a medical malpractice case to trial rather than settling. So it's a court film. I've never watched it, never heard of it. But if anybody is interested in it, there you go. You don't have to do the research now. I was way off though. I don't know where I got Dennis Leary and whoever else I said. For the two roles I heard in track 3, it's actually Jason Schwartzman and Jonah Hill from a film called I Heart Huckabees, which I have seen, but back in like the mid 2000s when it came out. So I don't remember any of it. I don't remember the people in it. The people I thought were in it, or the people that I thought I heard, are not in this film at all. I don't know, but I gotta go watch it again because I remember enjoying it. I remember it being a really sharp comedy. But anyways, back on topic of the music. Actually, it makes me think though, like we have 2 tracks with movie quotes in it. We only have 2 more songs with lyrics at all, and it's very possible that those lyrics also come from a film. I suppose we'll see when we get there. Is that what they do though? They watch a film, they hear a line, and they're like, dang, that's a powerful quote. We should put some music to it. or are they just like walking quote dictionaries? Because like that used to be a cool thing, right? Uh, Quoting movies. I don't really see people do it too often anymore. I mean, now we have memes, right? Which is kind of like it, but we also contort it. We take the text and we put different text. We take the context and put different real text on top of it. Um, but we also take exactly what they said. We just do it with pictures. I don't hear people quoting in real life though. That feels like a very 80s and 90s thing to do. Um, so maybe they just kind of grew up with that. Memorizing quotes was a cool thing to do, and they just have this repertoire of awesome quotes. They write music, and they're like, oh, this makes me think of that one quote. I'm curious what angle they go about creating this stuff, or if there's even a correlation at all. Maybe the quotes are completely out of context. They have nothing to do with the music. I don't know. I've got questions for Maybe She Will. Anyways, this was two people arguing. One of them was pro destroying the nature and putting strip malls and buildings and apartments everywhere, and the other one was against it. One called it socialism, the other one just called it enjoying what's around you. And they end up getting into a fight at the end, where one person says, at one point, you won't even know what happens when you stand in a meadow at dusk. And the other one's like, well, what does happen? And he's like, everything. And he's like, nothing and everything. And they go back and forth on this. I mean, it's social commentary, once again, very much in line with our last track. Looking at the situation of life around us and wanting to make a comment about how things are changing for the worse. And once again, despite this album being 15 years old now, 14 years old, it's still rather appropriate. I mean, it really depends on where you live, I suppose. If you live out in the, a small town, maybe you got one or two gas stations, you probably aren't seeing too much of this. But, I mean, where I live, it, dang, man, 30 years ago, we didn't even have a major road. And now I live right next to one of the roads that takes you out to Disney, and it is packed from end to end. It is a super long road, and it is just packed every piece of it. I live right next to a major highway, and this place just keeps growing and growing. There used to be orange groves right around the corner, and instead now there's a mall, a strip mall. And the one piece of land that existed right next on the other side of the road from that strip mall, um, a farmer owned it and refused to sell it. That was been like the big story for the past 15 years or so. They refused to sell that land, and so you have, a Best Buy and an Olive Garden, and then the strip mall on the other side, and there's another strip mall just like a block down, and then you have this massive field with cows in the middle of all of this. And it's funny to me because it looks so visually out of sorts. But I always thought it was a really nice point there that where everything else is being built up, that isn't. And he sold that land about a year ago, I guess. There's no construction on it yet, but that's because people are planning it. I guarantee in 5 more years that whole stretch is just going to be buildings. We have apartments down here. This was never a hot spot. This was a small little town, outside of Orlando, which is the big place to go. And now this little town it's a pretty big city. And so like I relate to this a lot. Um, and even my opinion even might be a bit more extreme than just not being able to know what happens when you stand in a meadow at dusk, but just the sheer idea of infrastructure. Our roads haven't really been expanded from where they were, and building up all these apartments and strip malls. This is now a hotspot for people, and now there's actually people on the roads, and it's just clogged up. Even getting out of my subdivision at 8 in the morning can take you 10 minutes to get out of the light onto the main road. A subdivision. This isn't even a really big subdivision, but there's a bunch of people who live here now. It's crazy. So yeah, it's more social commentary. That's what this track is. But again, how do I tie it back to the music? We have anger. We have. It's not really sorrow though that we go into the second part. I call it bittersweet, but honestly, it's maybe a little quiet resentment. Maybe it's a feeling of defeat. Ooh, yeah, that might be what it's leaning into there. Defeat. And then a bit of a drive. The victorious moment in the latter half of our B section might actually just be a second wind of resistance going back into the anger. In fact, this song might just be about the cycle of protest. And again, it is just so relevant still today. Coming off of our last track, where I was talking about the news cycle just being the same thing, the same cycle of ideas being rehashed over and over and over. It's really tiring to hear the same stories day in, day out. The first time you hear them, it is revolting. You want to vomit. You want to get out in the streets. And, the 50th day, you're like, I guess this is just the way it is now. Nothing's changing. I don't have the energy to do this anymore. And then eventually you get the second wind and you're disgusted about it again. It's not just background noise. Is that what this time last, and that's exactly it. This time last year, we were outraged about this topic the same time last year. 365 days ago, we were outraged about this topic. Things mellowed out in that time, and now we're back to the same moment of the next year, the same topic. We're outraged again. That's exactly what this song's about, isn't it? Oh man, I'm getting worked up. I gotta calm down and appreciate the music. Got a lot of like garbage news coming out lately for US people. I try to keep it separated from work, The music, I try to appreciate the music on its own. If it talks about social stuff, I might talk about where I sit on that spectrum, but I try to keep it separated. But man, reading US news and listening to, they call it politics, but it doesn't really feel political anymore. It just feels like attacks. It's not about two sides with equal viewpoints anymore. Uh, it just makes me angry. And I try to keep it separate from the channel so that we can keep it light-hearted-ish. If a song gets heavy, we'll get heavy with it. But yeah, I mean, these two songs back to back are just reminding me about so much stuff that's happening right now in the US. And by right now, I mean also today and last week and last month and last season and last year. And it's so tiring. It's exactly what the song is talking. It's tiring. It's exhausting. You shouldn't have to fight to simply exist. And it's dumb that we have to. All right. Moving on. I think that's all I got to say about that one. Oh man, I've been talking so long. This little controller went to sleep. I pushed the button and nothing happened. I was like, oh my god, it broke. That would be the worst thing to happen in the middle of a long video like this. For like something shorter, I'm doing like a 30-minute one song analysis. I can switch to manually changing things around. But for a long video like this, I got so many things going on. It really helps to have this little device here with all these buttons to do stuff for me. All right, next song is called Accept and Embrace. let's dive into this and see what's going on with this one. Ooh. Really, it's right side focused. Ooh. So initially I took this as the beat. But it's not. These are dotted notes, dotted quarters against our pulse. Two, three, 4, 1, 2, 3. Yeah. It's creating like a really slow hemiola against our chord time signature. So that last section was interesting because it was 7, but once again was working with 3.5 beat phrases, splitting that odd number right down the middle. And see, atmospherically, this is a lot warmer. It's sort of like a comforting hug after the last 2 tracks. Interesting, the piano just pushes it up an octave and sticks with that. solid volume. Yeah, that ending was really nice. The build up to it worked really well. Going into the blast beats was this immense weight, and then at the end of it, we have this phenomenal release of that weight and allowing it to dissipate. I thought it worked really well for what it was aiming for, but it did so in an interesting way. Um, like I mentioned earlier, the song felt like a hug. I think I said that earlier. I said it was warm. Um, but there was one moment, like 3 minutes in or something, when we hit our second heavy section, the one that would eventually lead us into the blast beats into our outro. And up until that point, we were kind of in a lull. We were between big moments, and it sort of felt like talking to a friend. Um, and things getting a bit deep or emotional or philosophical, profound or whatever, and there's a tension that's building to the conversation, and then uh, it's shifting to heavier topics, right? And the emotion starts to build, and then your friend just reaches out and gives you a hug, and you just you feel that warm embrace, and that is that big first note in that final section. And then the build up from there is just like all the complexities of this feeling of comfort, right? And that's, I don't remember if I called it that earlier, but the song does feel very comforting to me. I think primarily it's going to be that off center piano part, the one that's working with the dotted quarter notes. Um, it's consistently a bright light against the rest of it. But even when we look at the weight of the wall of sound that we get in the guitars, it's not angry or sad. It's definitely a bit mixed, of course, as this whole album tends to be, but it's inviting. It's not happy. It's not joyful, I should say, but it's sort of normalizing. Um, an element of the track to act as a center, possibly, for everything else. And it might even be there to exponentiate, is that a word? To support and show contrast towards that piano line that feels so bright and joyous. And maybe it feels like such a bright, gleaming light because we have this element of center to contrast it with. But yeah, the song to me at least feels like being heard and understood, and that moment of realization that you have a support system, a support group, and that you're not alone. That's what the song feels like to me. And it's just such a phenomenal, like I said, it's like the last 2.5, 3 minutes of the track. Everything really clicks for me. And it just makes a lot of sense in a way that the other tracks haven't really. They've alluded to ideas, but I never really got a solid feeling on them. And this just absolutely, at least for me, sticks the landing. Or maybe I should reverse that. And I feel like I've stuck the landing with understanding it. Not to say that this song did anything different than the others, I just connected with it better. And put that onus of action on me connecting with it rather than the inverse. I am a bit intrigued though about the rest of the track. The midsection, of course, was to be the contrast. You got your high, you get your low, you bring it back to the high. I mean, that is how the album operates. It's how a lot of post-rock operates. So it makes sense to me. It has a little bit of metric stuff in it, especially with the dotted quarter note on the piano, and that's just because they're also a mathy band. But it's really the opening that I think intrigues me the most, specifically the rhythmic element of it. Well, maybe not even just rhythmic. The entire opening is strange. As I pointed out on the audio visualizer, the volume levels of each side were very topsy-turvy. One was always quite a bit louder than the other. It kind of shifted. There were instruments that were panned specifically to one side that were not consistently present, but when they were fairly loud and in your face. And they tended to alternate. They were not consistently present. And it makes a song that feels like it's leaping back and forth, but it's not a single item bouncing around. It's sort of like your attention getting drawn to multiple directions. But it was also done so with electronic instruments, correct? I can't remember now. Like, the ending is the only thing of that track that is pretty solid in my head, but there were electronic instruments. I'm pretty sure the percussion was at least electronic. I think we had a synthesizer, though, going on. It was just so far outside of the bounds of the album, though. At least within the general sound. The fact that we had new instrumentation on the track is pretty consistent. Every track seems to have its own unique instrument that could possibly be seen as an identifier of the track, which I think is an interesting concept. There aren't too many artists, rock, metal, or otherwise, that would create a sonic fingerprint for each track of an album. All you have to do is listen for a key aspect and you'll be able to know what song it is. And that's, most bands are going to use riffs and stuff, but I'm talking about something sonic. A key part, a key sound, and utilizing a different instrument in each of the tracks is an interesting way to go about putting that identifier in there. Never thought about doing that before, but man, that's an interesting idea. If I ever did a concept album, I think I would include that, if I remembered. Same bassline instruments on all of them, but each one is going to feature a unique instrument. It's not going to be like a solo. It'll be present throughout most of it. That's not exactly what's happening here, but very interesting. Was there anything else in this one? I don't think so. It also didn't have lyrics. I don't think. No, neither does the next one. Also, the next one, geez. So most of these tracks have had really cool names or really chill names and given me things to think about. For some reason, this one deviates from that and is comical or possibly immature, depending on where you think that the title might have come from. How to Have Sex with a Ghost. Okay. That is the title. Let's dig into it. Bringing back the edgy sound from our last track. So we've reached 3-point harmony there, and we did that elsewhere too. I think it was track 2, we had 3-point harmony. double time in it. Yeah. Whoa, 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 whoa. Okay. So this is the first one that I think sort of sits in the realm of music that stands on its own a little less. I haven't really touched on this topic too much this album because honestly, I think that the emotional aspect of a lot of these songs and the atmospheric stuff that they're writing is enough to dig into. Um, as I stated earlier, I would prefer some melodic writing on top of this, some sort of line to keep me engaged, but on the whole, our first four tracks, our first four tracks have been, I think they stand on their own pretty well. But it's always sort of been at the back of my mind in a couple of these sections, I could really use something else here. This is good foundation, but where's the lead? And it's always been more of a moment to moment thing. But this track as a whole, I think, is the first time that I wholeheartedly believe something should have been added. And I think it's primarily because they get away from the more emotive, in touch with your feelings type of atmospheric writing, and they go for a purely heavy rock kind of metal thing going on. The music just isn't bringing the depth that the other tracks have emotionally, and it's on the same line with the rhythmic and melodic density in that there isn't much. Um, and so there just isn't anything to get into, at least from my perspective. I'm sure some of you might say, yeah, the heaviness and the riffage is enough for me. And yeah, I mean, this is a subjective take of mine. Um, but this is the first time in the album I've wholeheartedly through the entire track wished there was something else going on. And I feel a bit underwhelmed by it. More underwhelmed than I have about some of the other sections I've talked about, where I wish there was something more to them. And that's not to say that this is a bad song. I just think it's a really good foundation. The whole time I was hearing a violin part with, oddly enough, a flute. I don't know why I went to a flute, but I can hear a flute in this song really easily. And of course, it's not necessarily something I think would be necessary. Repeating myself, they're a bit redundant to make the song better, but I find it really easy also to hear some hardcore vocals on top of this. It just fits well with the music, and honestly, that's what the music feels like to me. It's a hardcore, post-hardcore track, maybe some lighter mathcore, since it does play around with phrasing and time signature a little bit. And in that way, I'm used to hearing some vocals on top of that because musically there's just not enough there to grab my attention. And unlike with other tracks that eventually moved into something and had a payoff to some of the more shallower sections, this didn't have the payoff that the rest of the tracks typically went towards. So I am a bit torn with that though, because it is the heaviest song we've heard so far, and I do enjoy it. Like I mentioned, it has like a post-hardcore, new metal, grungy kind of thing going on, and those are kind of a lot of my favorite types of music that has an edgier sound to it, more of a bite. And so musically, I really like this. It's just there's not enough meat on the bone for me. There was something else I wanted to say, but I can't remember what it was. So give me a moment to tab through that real quick. I don't want to move on without saying it because it felt important. Normally I'd pause for the lyrics and I'd probably check it out then, but we don't have lyrics, so I'm going to pause to revisit a couple of sections. And I'm glad I did. One thing I want to hit on real quick is the drumming. Once again, it's something I talked about on the first track. It has kind of chilled out a little bit as far as keeping my attention or dragging my attention away from the atmospheric stuff, but the drums here are phenomenal. There's so many nice little embellishing lines, random rolls here and there. It's not just stuck to one instrument either. We've had hi-hat rolls, ride cymbal rolls, snare rolls. They're just all over the place, and they're just like worked into these little pockets. You're like, they couldn't possibly fit anything in there. He's like, watch this, do do do, and he like puts this nice little pocket of 16th notes in there where they really don't belong but fit well. Yeah, the drumming is just insane on this, and it's a perfect atmosphere for the drummer to go off on as well because it's already heavy and intense, and the drummer seems to really work well within that. When the band chills out, the drummer chills out too. And as I mentioned in the first song, when the song was chill, the drummer had a forward momentum, a constant movement to it, and it really was drumming that felt more at home in a heavier section, but it just kind of pulled back the velocity to make the attacks less punchy in order to work well with the lighter atmosphere. And so here it feels like the drummer is really within their element, both volume wise and pattern wise. I did want to look at that one line that I thought was really cool. It was the main guitar line throughout most of this. The section was in 4/4. But uh, we had 3/8 notes, sorry, 6/8 notes, followed by 6/8 notes, followed by, I'm not quite sure yet. I think it was two groups of triplet eighth notes. The idea here, though, is that you play 6 notes, do 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 do. You play it twice, but then you're only have half the amount of time now because you've taken up 3 beats And then 3 beats, that's 6 out of your 8 since we're working in 4/4. So you only have 2 beats left to put 6 notes into. And so we work with it in triplets. We have a triplet of 3 in the first beat and a triplet of 3 in the... Yeah, it is eighth note triplets then. And so we have a metric modulation going on here, plus a almost feels like a tempo shift as far as the guitars, because when you get and it has this like rushing feeling, which almost feels like the same thing we heard in track 1, where we were working with the 4/4-2, where we have a full bar, then half a bar. It feels like we lurch, right? Except in that case, it felt like we were going to the next bar too early. But here we have a full idea. We're not going to call it a bar. We're going to call it an idea. We have another full idea, and then we have a half of an idea to wrap it up. But instead of feeling like we're tripping into the repetition of the phrase, it feels like we're playing it at double speed, and technically we are. In order to cram this full bar, or this full idea, into half the same length. And I don't think that there's any correlation between these two. It's probably a rhythmic idea that's popped up several times and I've just missed it before. But I think it's really interesting how we've kind of heard the inverse of this despite the same setup. Full, half is our phrasing. And one time it felt like we were lurching forward, and this time it feels like we're speeding up. We're going into light speed so we can catch up and land at the right time. And so it doesn't feel abnormal, it just feels rushed. I don't know, like I said, it's just kind of a nice idea there. I don't think it has any correlation or meaning past that. It's just a nice idea. Probably something that they feel very comfortable in as far as their riff writing goes, is the whole half idea. I think that was it. I also really like that one moment though, when we had the full music, big bodied, heavy rocking section, and then we had like 2 beats of the same riff but quiet with no drums, I think, and then that was actually half of a bar, and we come back in on beat 1 of the next bar, back with the full body, full sound, full instrumentation. Nothing really changed, but we just had this little pocket of like, what would this sound like without the distortion? And it's just a really nice way to sort of reset your ear, right? As I always say, contrast helps big moments feel big, small moments feel small. And we had been at 10 for quite some time now. So like, well, let's reset it down to 2 and bring it right back up to 10. And it does kind of work as a quick reset. It's not going to last as long. The idea of feeling it at a 10 is going to bring it back down to the norm much quicker than if we had a full palate cleanse. But it is a nice, like I said, little quick reset to allow the ending to still feel impactful without dragging out the song with another section to have that bigger ending. Alright, this one did not have lyrics to it, so we're going to be continuing on. I have no idea what to make of the story on this one. It just feels like an aggressive track to me. I didn't really connect with it outside of just, I like the sound of it. Like I said, it feels like music from genres that I enjoy. And then the title, like, what do I even do with that title? So we have 3 more tracks ahead of us. We'll see how I feel about these. I don't see any need to combine them for time-wise to run 6 and 7 together and then do 8. But if I don't have anything to say about 6 particular to it, we might just roll into the next one. They're both on the shorter side. All right, let's hit it. We're going to be moving on into... Very sorry about that. We're going to be moving on into the next track. Let's go with it.
Our history will be what we make of it. And if there are any historians about 50 or 100 years from now, and there should be preserved the kinescopes of 1 week of all 3 networks, they will there find, recorded in black and white and in color, evidence of decadence, escapism, and insulation from the realities of the world in which we live. We are currently wealthy, fat, comfortable, and complacent. We have a built-in allergy to unpleasant or disturbing information. Our mass media reflect this. But unless we get up off our fat surpluses and recognize that television in the main is being used to distract, delude, amuse, and insulate us, then history will take its revenge and retribution will not limp in catching up with us.
Dude, that phrasing. Obviously they get to match the tempo to the soundbite so that it lines up that way, but as soon as he finished his last syllable, our bass kick came in. It's just really great timing. But it also seemed to fit well within the phrasing. It actually landed on 1.
The human race is doomed never to learn from its mistakes. We are the only animals on this globe who periodically set out to slaughter each other for the best, the noblest, the most inescapable of reasons. We know better, but we do it again and again in generation after generation. It may be that our empire too is doomed, like all those that have gone before it, to continue to spill and waste its best blood on foreign soil, no matter what we say or do in this place, or think, or believe, or have learned from history. But, thank God, for us,
Interesting way to end that. Honestly, with how close we were getting to the end of the track, I figured it was going to move into the next one smoothly and that I was just going to have to time it well for the pause. But it just abruptly ends at the end of the soundbite. Interesting choice. So this one to me reads as standard. Let me explain that. It reads as status quo. It reads as the state of things in their base aspect. It reads as ineffectual. It reads as mundane. It reads as unchallenging, non-conflicting, palatable, standard. The song is a series of chord progressions that don't really change with some electronic beats in the background. We get a bass kick, 4 on the floor. We eventually get a snare sound and a hi-hat sound. Really rigid, runs counter to everything that the drummer has brought to the table with the drum kit. To me, all of this is purposeful. The atmosphere is vapid, even. It is just sort of generic inspirational chords. It is as far as I can see it, it's a fluff piece. It's a fluff song. Fluff pieces are articles that don't really say much, but are supposed to take up space. Sometimes they're supposed to push a specific narrative as well, even though they don't say anything at all. And that's what this feels like to me. It's a song that doesn't say anything. It looks like it does. It has some uplifting chords to it. It has a nice beat to it you can move your body to, but compared to the hyper emotional landscape we've listened to so far, this is nothing. There's no energy, there's no passion. It is lifeless, it is limp compared to what we've heard earlier. It lacks that wall of sound that has dominated every song. This is the first track not to go with the inverted bell curve of starting big, going small, and starting big. Or ending big. God, I can't even talk. It pushes against everything. In fact, while the soundbite is going the first time through, the music is literally just the chord progression. There is no depth to it at all, and it's not a complex emotion that they're creating with the sound sphere, with the atmosphere. It is just generic inspirational sounds. This is a song that utilizes stuff to make nothing. And I think that's the point of it. It is a wide, what do they call it? A wide net? Casting a wide net. I think that's the phrase I'm looking for. In order to draw in as many people. If you listened to this as the first song for Maybeshewill that you've ever heard in your life, it would give you a very wrong impression of who they are. Or a very good impression if you're picking up on the nuances, which I think are going to be difficult without context. It is a flat track that does one thing without contrast, without dynamics, without, like I mentioned, even passion. There's no strong emotion here. It's all very middling, but the purpose is to be attractive to as many people as possible, to not challenge anybody's way of thinking. And it lines up with what the lyrics were talking about as well. I say lyrics, but the soundbite. He had mentioned that if historians look at all of the footage of the past 50 to 100 years, which I don't know when this was said, but regardless, he says there you will find recorded in black and white and in color evidences of decadism, escapism, and insulation from the realities of the world in which we live. We are currently we have a built-in allergy to unpleasant or disturbing information, and mass media reflects this. He says, unless we get off of our fat surpluses and recognize television is in the main is being used to distract, delude, amuse, and insulate, history will take its revenge and retribution, and will not limp in catching up with us. Oh, and retribution will not limp in catching up with us. It's basically saying that the people are becoming indifferent to anything that isn't palatable. We are becoming empty and lifeless. We are lacking passion and emotion and simply absorbing what we're told to absorb, being who we're told to be. We need to get up and take back our lives. Take back our personas. Stop insulating ourselves and experience life. And I don't think it is an accident that the music replicates this lacking of identity. This song musically could have been written by just about anybody. The rest of the music on the album is very much Maybeshewill. It fits patterns of post-rock, but has elements of them that separate themselves from other post-rock bands like Cult of Luna. This one, though, feels very generic, and that's the point of it. It's not unpleasant, it's not disturbing. It is escapist for as many people as it can. It has a wide palatability to it. And through that, there really isn't a lot of to dissect or discuss on a theoretical area. Like I mentioned, it just has this general background inspirational speech chord progression to it that eventually introduces an electronic beat. That's it. That's the whole song. It lacks all the identity and personality that they've showcased up until this point. Interestingly, though, I love this detail. The next soundbite that we get towards the end actually does present some information that is unpleasant and disturbing. More so than the mirror at the beginning. Basically, the dude saying, hey, look at yourself here. Take a good hard look at where we're at. He really starts to get into some more hard truths. And one of them is how we use all sorts of dividing lines to create us versus them narratives, which allow us to enact violence on each other. Even starting this whole section with maybe the human race is doomed never to learn from its mistakes. Goes on to say we're the only animal on this globe who periodically set out to slaughter each other for the most inescapable of reasons. And as he's saying this, which is a very harsh truth a lot of people don't want to look at, the music finally does begin to swell. We start to hear a push towards that wall of sound that the rest of the songs have always landed on. Except now it's done to cover up the soundbite. This exceptionally palatable, uplifting, inspirational music that everybody would find palatable. No one would really find it difficult to listen to. They might not enjoy it. It doesn't really stand on its own too well. It's very good for background music, especially for a speech like this, but it's not anything somebody would say sounds bad. This, as they stated, pleasant and non-disturbing. It is decadent, full of escapist ideas to allow you to think about the pleasantries of it, are covering up this person telling us about the realities of the world. It goes perfectly in line with the lyrics. This one sampled from a movie called Good Night and Good Luck, a historical drama about the conflict between radio and television journalist Edward Murrow and American Senator Joseph McCarthy. Interesting. This film's quote was itself derived from Murrow's speech Wires and Lights in a Box, given at a convention on October of 1958. So it's a quote from a movie that was quoting a real-life quote. Interesting. The second bit, this was actually a different person. So they took two separate quotes and smashed them together to create a concept that they wanted to showcase. The second bit, which is about war, so it was sampled from the closing speech of the movie Young Winston, which is itself based on an autobiography of Winston Churchill addressing the years of his life from 72 to 02. 1874 to 1902. So he had two quotes from films where those quotes were based off of real quotes. Interesting. But yeah, that's what I get out of this one. It's another case where I think the music works really well in tandem with everything going on around it. And is probably only the second time in this album that I've come out of a song feeling capable enough to say with any sort of authority about what I think they're doing. All right, 2 more to go. It's going by real quick. Oh, geez, it's already been 2 hours. Okay, so for me, it's going by real quick, but this looks like it's going to be a pretty typical 2.5 hour video. Maybe even pushing to 3, depending on how much I have to say about these last 2 tracks. Oh yeah, and the title, Our History Will Be What We Make of It. All right, let's move on. We're going to check out this next track. This is what I was interested to see how this paired with This Time Last Year. Yeah, now we have Last Time This Year. Let's hit it, see what's going on. No, this is familiar. I don't know what's going on here. This is inverted somehow of something we've already heard. And I don't know if they're playing it backwards. It has to be because the sounds are not reversed. I honestly have no idea what's going on though. Like, I've got to listen to the two of these back to back now. Really interesting phrasing in that sometimes they'll use a 4-bar phrase and sometimes they'll use a 5, and I haven't found a pattern to when they do which. Yeah, I can get behind this. What? Another one with just a super sharp ending. Alright, so this one to me is an inverse of this time last year. First of all, we have our opening riff, which is very similar, but it's not. And I don't know what's going on with it. I don't know if it's played backwards. So you take the sheet music and you just flip things in reverse and then you play it that way. So the last note becomes the first note. Honestly, I don't know. It's not the sound itself is not reversed. So they didn't just reverse the recording. The sounds are all going in forward, but the notes are odd, all of them. And so right from the start, we have some sort of inversion going on of what we had last time. And if I remember correctly, that was a song about being tired of, or not being tired, the cycle of protest, disgust, and not apathy, but exhaustion, of just constantly being in a state of, where was this track? Oh, there it is. Just constantly being in a state of being upset at the same thing day in, day out, and seeing the cycles of, basically seeing the news cycles and being disgusted about something, protesting it, realizing that it's not going to end, and losing steam on it, only to realize that this time next year you're in the same state, and the same topics are coming up and you're protesting them again, and nothing's changing. Things are just slowly getting worse. Every year you're sick that it has moved just a hair bit, closer to something terrible happening in this area. And so this almost feels like an inverse of that. What if instead of being controlled by the cycle, we end the cycle? The first time I read this, it made me think about a closing of a gap, right? If we were thinking about this time last year, that's a 360-day gap. But if we were talking about last time this year, it could be that this cycle has repeated in a much smaller range of time. And maybe we were having this discussion, or these events were in the public discourse not a year ago, but a month ago, a week ago. Last time that this happened this year. And so, again, this is something that, from that point of view, I think is also still really relevant. Trying to figure out what topic I want to talk about for this as an example. I don't want to pull up any of them. No, I really don't. It's all so disgusting that it happens so frequently. So much stuff happens so frequently. But I mean, if anybody keeps up with U.S. politics, there's like 3 major things that it feels like they just get swapped out every week, and no one seems to be changing anything about them, and they just keep getting worse. So that's what this feels like. It's a shrinking down, but I think there's another way to read this. Not that this happened the last time this same year, but that this will be the last time this year that we talk about this. That this is a problem. That we will go through this cycle. And it almost feels like there's a putting down of your foot. We will not have this go over again. It ends today. That kind of feeling, that type of empowerment. And coming off of the track that said, there are difficulties in life, and you need to you need to get out of your comfort zone and deal with them. And then for this song of empowerment to come after that, I don't think is an accident. I don't know if that's necessarily what they were going for. But between reading the title from a different perspective and interpreting our A section as an inversion of, the other track, which was about being stuck in the cycle, the inverse of that would be breaking the cycle. And so that's how I want to look at this track, is that it's a song of empowerment. And I think that's why the guitar line at the end of the song is so triumphant. It's so big. We have a lot of elements of melody in here. There is a conjoining of ideas, and this is something I hadn't thought about much of at all because there's so few instruments across this album. But a lot of these sections aren't really unified outside of the wall of sound. This is one of the first songs I think that we've heard, especially in a large capacity, where multiple individual lines come together to create something gorgeous. It's not just about coming together for a wall. It's about coming together and bringing your specific, unique elements to craft counterpoint, to make beauty, to make art. And so, while unification is a pretty big theme musically across all these songs, thanks in part to post-rock's love of the wall of sound, this is the first time that I have felt an essence of unity rather than unison. About working in tandem and doing what you can, doing your part to be part of something bigger. In hopes that we don't have to tread this same ground next year. And I like that. It's got a nice, beautiful element to it. Now, this isn't the end of the album, though. We do have to explore our longest album. Our longest song. This one also has lyrics to it. There's no annotations on it, so I guess I'll have to search these up when we get to the lyrics section and see what movie they come from, although I would be pleasantly surprised if they're sung. But given that we've had 3 sets of sound bites, I'm going to assume this one is as well. And we're going to see where we take this concept. If the last track said, get up and do something, and our penultimate track gives us that empowering energy, what's going to be the final message here? So with that said, let's wrap this up. Look at the title track, singing the word hope in 4-part harmony. They have 1 chance left to actually sing hope in 4-part harmony. Let's see if they do it. Oh no, what's going on? I clicked the wrong button. Now we're going to check it out. Yeah, shifting from downbeats to offbeats. I always like that. It's a subtle thing. It's easy to do, but it always sounds so good to me. And once again, it's a very warm sound. Massive. We do have a new instrument here as well, that really sharp synthesizer. That's the same line. Where are we going with it though?
We are young, confident, affluent, and with no memory of tougher times. We've grown up in an era of never-ending financial growth and expected things to stay that way. We've grown up in owner-occupied homes with total acceptance of technology, global warming, and terrorism. Our whole society has been based around consumerism for the past 15 years, making us dream consumers, yet we don't know the difference between a credit card and a debit card, and we have no idea how much a pint of milk costs. On average, we have 800 illegally downloaded songs, and 1 in 8 of us spends more than £100 a month on our mobile phone bill. We've never read a newspaper, and we've never used our chance to vote. We allow our governments to make decisions without giving us all the facts. They send troops abroad who will die in order that we can steal resources from the people who have them. People who meant us little or no harm until we invaded their country. We allow those troops to commit horrendous atrocities, and yet our leaders hang our alleged enemies for much less. We've spent years entrusting our futures to our parents, our governments, the banks and the corporations that have continually lobbied for their own interests, and we've let them make selfish decisions that have left our society teetering on the edge of ruin. We're blinded from the information that would really shock us by stories of sex and sleaze, which doesn't make the smallest difference to our lives, and so we have no desire to do anything about the things that really do. We've watched as greed wipes billions off the world's stock markets, destroys jobs and lives, and proves that capitalism is just as corruptible by human nature as communism. These are tough times, but we seek solace in our friends and co-conspirators. We make small differences in each other's lives and dream that we can make real progress.
Are there 3 minutes of silence on this? I'm gonna let it run because that's what I do. I don't want to miss anything. Well, I'm gonna start my analysis, and if things change, I'll shut up and listen. Not where I was expecting this to go. We have this massive triumphant moment at the end of the last track, and a lot of energy and forward momentum, and really pushing the listener to, take part in their world. And then we come to this rather laid back track, especially in the latter half once the spoken word comes in. And it's comforting, it's warm, but it feels like it feels anticlimactic based on where we came from. And in that sense, I think the song itself is fine, but its placement is weird. But you can't really change that since lyrically, this can't go anywhere but the end. We really have to go through the rest of the album to get to this point. And so, from that perspective, I'm kind of torn on it. I think it's a fine track. It's just it kind of has a lot of that nonchalant energy, lacking that passion that we saw in our history will be what we make of it. Oh, here we go. Strangely enough, that sounds familiar to me, but I can't place it. Neat little bonus track there, I suppose. Interestingly, I never read anything about there being a bonus track, but it was 10 seconds after 3 minutes of silence, so that's a bonus track in my books. But yeah, the song sort of just is, and maybe that's the point. Maybe after getting your attention and giving you the power, the energy, the drive to change things, maybe it understands that the next step is just acceptance. I mean, that's even one of the tracks is about accepting. And that was the one that to me felt like a big hug. And this one does too. I mentioned it's kind of warm. It has a nice embracey feel to it. It's very comforting. But the lyrics or the soundbite is once again a call for action. And there's a lot of lyrics. I only picked up a couple of them at the beginning. So it's a 4/4 song. We start off a little heavier, if I remember right. And then we just bring it down. And once the vocals kick in, it's just mellow for the rest of the track. I guess let me hit some lyrics and then we'll wrap this guy up. So this song was, or is, lyrically interesting. First of all, I can't seem to find anywhere that this was taken from. In fact, the only time I've seen, I copied and pasted a couple of these lines. I didn't check all of it, but the only time that these lines come up are about the song, whether it's a Tumblr post about the song or a lyrics page, Genius, AZ lyrics, all that stuff. They seem to not exist outside of this track, which makes them original works. It's a poem by someone in the band, then, which stands out in stark contrast to all the sound bites we've had previously. But that also means something interesting. Someone in the band said this. This isn't just original work, but it's an original recording as well. It's not a soundbite. And so through that, yeah, I don't have, vocals. There's 3 people credited with vocals on this. None of them part of the band? I'm kind of confused by that. I only heard one. Well, I never got my hope either. There's no saying of the word hope in here. Huh. Anyways, what they have seemed to have done is crafted a narrative that, as far as I see it, take us from track 1 to 7. And explores several topics with social commentary on them, while creating a sort of soundtrack to explore these emotions and feelings and thoughts. And now that we have gone through that and have found a moment of drive and not momentum, what's it called when you find the motivation? Now it's one last moment for the band themselves to tell you what they think. And so it is a giant poem about growing up. Particularly, it seems to be about millennials growing up without much resistance in their life at all. Talks about how um, everything is pretty easy. Uh, we haven't really had much pushback from much. The times haven't really been tough. And so it's left an entire generation of people who have never read newspapers and never voted, and they just allow things to happen around them because that's sort of how they were raised. You let everybody else make your decisions and you ignore all the small stuff and you just keep trucking through. And now that things are getting worse and worse, we don't know how to deal with that. And so he finishes off and says, "These are tough times, but we seek solace in our friends, and we make small differences in each other's lives, and dream that we can make real progress." Almost as if to acknowledge that this isn't an album about telling you what you need to do, but acknowledging that they're in the same boat, and they might have been where you are right now, and that their friends are the ones who have helped them take a bit more of a stand in what happens around them. And hopefully, this can be the start of that for you, so you can be that friend for someone else. And I think that's why the music is rather, I don't want to say bland, but static and hopeful. It isn't really as mixed as it was at the beginning of the album. It's right here full of hope. Educate yourself, see what's going on, and take stances in order to not allow us to be stuck in the same cycles that we are. Be better than you were yesterday and pull your friends up and those around you with you. And so, while technically they never sang the word hope in 4-part harmony, we did have 4 plus instruments at the end, all creating an atmosphere of hope in the music. And an album that is full of ups and downs lands on something optimistic, which makes it that much sadder that a decade and a half later it's still relevant. Those are my thoughts on Maybeshewill's Sing the Word Hope in 4-part harmony. Let me know what you thought of this one down in the comment section. Above that, in the description box, you can find a link to Linktree. It takes you here. You can find ways to support the channel, a link to my music, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for today. Still not sure what I'm going to do tomorrow. It's up in the air, as I mentioned in one of yesterday's videos. Keep an eye on your community text feed, community post feed, or just your YouTube feed in general. Around 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, I'll let y'all know if I'm going to do a public stream or not. We don't have a Patreon stream for tomorrow, so that's why I don't know what's up. Usually I just take the day off. And when we've done all of the Patreon submissions for the live stream, which happens, it's usually a 4-week process, and April just happens to have 5 Sundays. So I usually take them off. But if I think about doing a public one with live requests, I'll let y'all know. Alright, until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.